Ravindra Kulkarni, who is the president of SIA. I'm the vice president. Dr. Ishwar Fadia is old president and also very active right now in executive committee. Dr. Rishikesh Vinod is in Fordham University in New York, and he is the immediate past president of SIA.
And present treasurer also.
And then Raj Vengapati is the secretary, and he handles most of these things for us. Very good. Anybody else that you should be talking to?
Natarajan has joined.
Who has joined?
Vivek Natarajan.
Vivek Shankar Natarajan.
Vivek
Yes.
Natarajan has joined, and he is also the new addition to our executive committee this year. Vivek Natarajan is in Houston. Amitabh Datta is in Florida, and he has joined CHU. He's also
Rohit Parikh has just joined.
committee member. So,
Rohit Parikh has just joined.
and I'm very happy
Yes.
to tell you, Dr. Bhatkar, one of my very good friends from Russia in Moscow is here. His name is Dmitry Epifanov, and he has hosted me in his University of Plekhanov, which is very close to Red Square, actually. And wonderful time for 1 week giving lecture there. So he's joining you from Moscow. And we are all anxious to hear. You're all anxious to hear what you say. Okay, Raviji,
Hello. Thank you for kind words. It has been a pleasure and an honor. Thank you.
See his picture. No, they don't share it.
Kishore, Rohit Parikh has just joined.
Oh, Rohit Parikh has joined. Yeah,
Yes.
you should introduce him too.
Yeah, Rohit Parikh is in computer science. He's a distinguished professor at City University of New York.
One request, Galaxy Tab A7. Sir, your video is also on. Can you please tell me your name so that I can put the name correctly on the
That's
screen?
Nanda Kumar.
I'm sorry?
Nandakumar.
Nand Kumar. Okay, let me make sure that.
How long is the time thing? 1 hour.
Thank you, sir. So,
Thank
Nand
you.
Kumar, yes. Anyone else? Rohit ji is there. Okay. You can unmute, sir. Rohit ji. You please unmute, Rohit ji. You need to unmute. You're speaking, but we can't hear you.
Here we go. So Ravi said I was a computer scientist, but I have a PhD in mathematics from the very same department from which he has a PhD in mathematics. So calling me a computer scientist is an understatement. It's misleading.
No, we include computer science in mathematics.
Right. Good. Thank you.
Right. So first, in the beginning days, I think everybody remember that all the computer science professors and teachers are academicians. They are coming from a mathematics origin. So that's how I think it's developed. So,
When I started, there were not two separate departments, even at Harvard.
yeah.
Very good. I think we can proceed with Dr. Ravindra Kulkarni, President of SIA, introducing this.
Hello.
Yes.
Can
Good morning
everyone
once
hear
again.
me?
Good morning once again, everybody. It's my pleasure to see everyone, and I welcome Padma Shri Dr. Vijay Bhatkar. And I request our president, I'm sorry, I'm the secretary for the SIA. My name is Rajshekhar Vengapati. And I'm requesting Professor Ravindra Kulkarni ji, is the president for SIA, to introduce our honorable guest, Padma Shri Vijay Bhatkar. Please, Ravindra, over to you.
Okay. Yeah, hello. Can you hear me well? All of you?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, welcome to all. And I should say that Dr. Vijay Pandurang Bhatkar is a legend in India and perhaps in the world. He has very broad interests and equally many broad actual accomplishments, all achieved in a single lifetime. Among his recognitions, suffice it to say that he is a Padma Bhushan, a Padma Shri, and a Maharashtra Bhushan. Since January 2017, he is a Vice Chancellor of Nalanda University. During 2012 to 2017, he was the Chairman of the Board of Trustees of IIT Delhi. And currently he is serving as the Chairman of Vijnana Bharati, a well-known non-profit organization of Indian scientists. In the year 2000, he established a company called the Multiversity, which is close to his heart, but about it I shall speak a little later. Vijayji is recognized as the father of supercomputers in India. In 1980s, the advanced countries refused to share their computer technology with India. At that time, the then Prime Minister Rajiv Gandhi entrusted to Dr. Vijay Bhatkar to develop the technology indigenously. Vijayji, with his uncanny eye for shortcuts, magnificently rose to the occasion and delivered the first Indian supercomputer, Param, in 1991. And a little later, the later version, Param 10,000 in 1998. And all this in very record time and at a cost much less than what was initially anticipated. Great nations are not built on borrowed technology, was his famous quote at that time. I knew about him before, and especially since I moved to India in the year 2000. But now we are both in Pune and have become good friends. I can see three factors which led to his very successful and productive life. The first is, of course, the in-depth knowledge of his chosen field of engineering and supercomputing and the corresponding physics, namely quantum mechanics. But the second is very unusual for most scientists. He has really in-depth knowledge of the whole Indian knowledge system and the Indian spiritual tradition. When one converses with him, one readily finds that he's completely at home with the chosen field of engineering, supercomputing, quantum mechanics. But at the same time, he's completely at home with our great spiritual masterpieces like Gita, Upanishads, Jnaneshwari, Dasbodh, and less known among the scientists, Yoga Vasishtha, and very rarely known among the scientists, the rich literature in the early 20th century in Sanskrit of Gulab Rao Maharaj, scattered in over 125 books. And these books contain really great rational, scientific, spiritual insights. And Vijayji has really mastered all this treasure. And for bringing together modern science and age-old spirituality, he established in the year 2000, as I said before, a company called Multiversity, and has brought about over 80 books so far. How does he manage to combine these diverse activities? The answer is the third factor, as I see, and which is he has consciously cultivated throughout his life, on which he's going to speak today. He has developed a romantic relationship with the muse of mathematics. In fact, looking at his career, a professional mathematician should realize the strengths of what mathematics is really about. Mathematics is not just number crunching and a strong sense of logic, but mathematics is verily the theory building machinery for all sciences. the physicists, chemists, biologists have certainly realized that in the basic sciences, and the economists and sociologists, they have realized that in the social sciences. But Vijayji is one of the very rare personalities who have realized the strength of mathematics in the spiritual field. In my opinion, in this sense, he is a modern Spinoza who applied Euclid's axiomatic method to explain ethics and philosophy. Vijayji is trying to apply the mathematical methodology to bring together science and spirituality, which is his lifelong interest. So with these words, I request Vijayji to explain to us his romance with mathematics, science, technology, and engineering. Vijayji.
Professor Ravindra Kulkarni, what a pleasure for me to really speak to some of the most distinguished people from India who went to America, both US and Canada and other parts of the world. And some of them, they are most distinguished people in their chosen fields. And you gave me an opportunity to talk to them this evening. So I'm really thankful to you, and thank you for that very gracious introduction. I don't know how far I fulfill the aspirations or the things that are on science and spirituality, but that has been my really the engagement, my involvement with my romance with science and mathematics, particularly mathematics. I'm an engineer by training because I'm an electrical engineer. That time there was no computer engineering when I was studying way back. I did my graduation in '65, and for my master's I went to MS University, Baroda. I think this university is there today, and it was at that time I think one of the most liberal universities. Maharaja Sayajirao, I think built. I think he was in the UK for a long time, and he has seen Oxford, Cambridge, and many other universities, and he wanted to build a very liberal universities particularly in the background of the kind of universities which were developing at the time. And I had a fortune. I think I had a big difficult choice to make for my master's, but by circumstances, which is a big story, how I came to the thing from IIT Bombay to MS University. But I consider that, I think that event in my life as really a, what do you call, the game changer in my life. I think coming from, I think from IIT, had I studied in IIT, I would have been a different person. IIT, I think MS University, Baroda, and we were all staying together from different faculties. I think we were in hostels, and then we intermingle, and there are so many activities in which students from different faculties, different disciplines mix together. So that gave me a totally different perspective. And the libraries, which are there, which are very large libraries that many good universities have, in which I think you have access to so many books, which not just engineering or not just science or not just mathematics, but including the arts and the humanities and musics and sculpture, and you try to make friends with these people. This is extremely important. Why I'm saying this is, I feel in the Indian context, there has been, I think, obsession with technology or engineering and medicine, other side. See, I think there is one thing, and engineering and medicine never mix together. I think they're separate thing. You have to make a choice. You want to go to engineering side, or you want to go to the medicine side, and of course you want to go to agriculture and many other disciplines. But that's separated. That really created silos. I think, and I think I was really fortunate when I went to MS University. We studying from different sciences, meeting in libraries, sharing tea, and a lot of discussions, people and staying together. I think this was remarkable. Anyway, I want to say that why I'm saying this particularly from another perspective, that the new policy which India is really harboring or is advanced, what you call the new national education policy. You must have heard of it, NEP. I think the major step India has taken in educational reforms, which we were expecting for a very long time. This policy was announced, it started in 1919, it was announced in 2020, and now we are started implementing that policy. Today it has been approved. this policy makes a breakthrough in this context, that we are talking about all universities must be liberal. Currently, we have, I think, technological universities, we have medical universities, we have agriculture universities, we have some universities devoted to humanities and law university. Now, what is, I think we visualize that all must be, every university must have all these multiple disciplines, and the students will have choice to choose their disciplines, which is available, of course, in all the US and North American universities and all good universities of the world. So this is the change which is being brought about, and it's a very good news for all of us. So one thing is, I think of seeing so many distinguished people before me. Some of them I know, some of them I don't know, and then many may be connected to it. I think I see my brother also here connected, and some names and like that. Many of people. I think I really grateful to you for sparing your time here and for this lecture. And I'm extremely grateful to, I think, Professor Ravindra Kulkarni, that he invited me for this lecture to SIA. I think if we really look at, I perceive this is a very important opportunity for me particularly, because I also am the chairman of Science and Engineering Research Board. And one of the initiatives that we have taken is that how do we involve, I think, the great people like you into India's march or India's advancements in academics, more important science and engineering and technology, which we call STEM, and in mathematics and many other disciplines, and how they can contribute to solve the grand challenge problems this nation is facing. I think this is one of our initiatives, and through this lecture and through this connection, I want to explore that possibility. And there is a special scheme which has been drafted called Vajra for this, that how to attract, I think, the Indian academicians, researchers into the programs of the grand challenge problems which we are trying to solve, the challenging problems which India has got, and which touch the life of 140 crore people. I'm talking of 1,400 billion people, 1.4 billion people on the earth. So these problems, and there is so much knowledge available. We all studied in some way or the other in India. Then we went for the higher opportunities of higher education, for advanced research to US, and particularly US and Canada, and also Australia and England and other countries. I think there has been one contribution I think India has greatly made, and it's a mutual, I think, is a contribution to knowledge. I think right from the Vedic times and earlier, I think the greatest contribution of India has been knowledge. Knowledge has been the singular pursuit of that civilization. Ours is the most ancient civilization, as we know. I think I'm not just saying because it is it is indeed the most ancient civilizations. Many civilizations arose, and there are dating problems. How do you date them? I think there are archaeological and there are historical and linguistic datings which are coming before us. But it's one of the most ancient civilizations of the world. But what has been the single pursuit? Single pursuit has been, I think, the exploration of the nature of reality, exploration of what is reality, and what are very fundamental questions which bother everyone in one of our lifetime. Why am I here? What I'm doing here? What is the purpose of my life? How do I give meaning to my life? And there are so many fundamental questions which we have raised, and so many tributes have been paid to Indian seers on raising this question and answering them. This has been the thing, and we are here today. When I say the academics are coming together, I think we are fundamentally exploring some of these questions which are still, I think, remain and will remain partially answered or unanswered today. One of the things is that the pursuit of truth has been mathematics. I think though I'm an engineer, I came to IIT Delhi for my PhD, and suddenly I found in a very different world put together, and there was a very large library. I think all universities have a great thing. They have good libraries. I think the sign of a great university is a great library where we have access to world knowledge on several disciplines, several things simultaneously. And when our IIT started arising, IIT-like institutions, and the collaboration with US, in collaboration with England and other countries, I think one of the greatest gifts from, I think, for higher education in India has been, I think, of course, the Institute of Science, and TIFR, and then the IIT started emerging. That gave a totally different perspective. That gave, I think, the whole world was, I think, was brought to India in that context. At the same time, this interchange of ideas, I think many of the things I think we say, and the challenges of a developing countries, where we have to make a challenge. I often go to, I've been the chairman of IIT Delhi, and I often have a question. The limited funds that are available, where do we spend? Do you spend for advanced research, for the instrumentation, installing computers, networks, or whatever it is, kind of things, or we have other lurking problem that we don't have enough schools, so we don't have enough teachers, we don't have chalks, we don't have buildings. So where do we? This has been from independence. This has been the great dilemma everybody faced. I remember this question was asked to Vikram Sarabhai in one of the meetings of the Planning Commission. Now we call it Niti Aayog Planning Commission, which was national planning. And the question was that how do we spend on launching each rocket, and it's like a Diwali rocket cracker kind of things, and then that's boom, and suddenly 100 crores are gone, or thousands of million rupees, or hundreds of $1 million have gone. I think. So what is that? The classic answer, the great answer, which Vikram Sarabhai gave, was that to the planners, was that, friends, this is not a question of we spend on the rockets or the atomic energy plants, or we spend on the schools or on the teachers. So this question cannot be answered. It is a simultaneous equation. There is not one solution to this. We have to solve all these problems simultaneously. Of course, there are priorities, but I think we will realize later on. He made a prophetic statement that for even in educating Indian farmers or educating our population, large population, one day will require satellites. At that time, the satellites had not come. We were just making an attempt to launch satellites by developing a space program. So his answer was that, sorry, we require to solve this. This problem of simultaneous equation, and that's what we are trying to do. And my life was spent on that issue, really. When I went to IIT, I was, of course, I was an engineering student, so electrical engineering, electronics laboratories, which were just emerging at that time. But my one attention, which I think I felt was a game changer, was the general systems theory. Those of you who are engineers, I think in 1960s, a new subject or new discipline came to the fore. Thanks to Bertrand Frey, Ludwig von Bertrand Frey, he gave the idea that, of course, that all engineering, different branches of engineering can be explained to general systems engineering based on the general system theory, which he had advanced. And suddenly, like mathematics, like I thought that's what my introduction to mathematics came. At that time, Professor Kulkarni, I was not even introduced to set theory. I'm studying PhD, and you have to go to mathematics department, and barely even IIT students were not exposed to. I think it was the 60s. I'm talking about to this one, and I had to begin from there. And we are not taught mathematics to that rigor in our engineering discipline at all. So then I decided to study it myself, to the self-study. I went to mathematics department, and the subject that attracted me was general systems theory. Suddenly, I think the separation, the boundaries across disciplines vanished as soon as I studied that, because I'm looking in the more abstract terms. I'm not looking at civil engineering. I'm not looking at mechanical or electrical engineering. I'm looking at only the systems. I think as such, everything can be looked at a system, I think, which input, output, with the control parameters and feedback and feed-forward systems, and not even the distinction between also the biology. I think the biological systems and physical systems also started vanishing. Now that attracted me. That abstraction, one of the greatest contribution of science is the abstraction. I think and one of the greatest contribution of the laws of physics, I think, which are expressed in mathematical terms. The whole universe can be expressed with some simple equations, and which is the amazing part of it. As Einstein said, the most incomprehensible part of the reality is that it is comprehensible. I think that is the thing which I felt that how a simple equations, mathematical equations, the construct which we have made can express the vast reality, the diverse reality in very simple way. And that's what I think, what I called, it was that I think you get attracted by some beautiful girl. So I think you establish a romantic relationship, sometimes the platonic, many of the great romances have been very platonic. I think what is all your imagination, and that imagination, I think mathematics is that kind of imagination. I think how do we express them? We started expressing the numbers, and then we went ahead. And one of the things which fascinated me was in the pursuit of particularly computing and then supercomputing, that how did we start imagining these numbers? So the decimal system, the greatest contribution of India to the world of mathematics and science. And now, really rightly, Einstein had remarked, where would the world be without the decimal system contribution from India? I think that, so that is the thing. And then come the imaginary numbers. I think, and it was very difficult to understand what meant, but that I think the mental construct of imaginary numbers and its contribution to is a ability to solve or to understand the very complex physical reality is the most remarkable contribution. I suppose the contribution to zero, the understanding of infinity, and more and more abstract terms. I think some of the greatest contributions of Indian mathematicians. I think that's why more than engineering, I got attracted to the world of mathematics, which I found very difficult because I had not studied even set theory. And I was struggling with it. I would rely on so many books around me in my hostel room and try to understand this imaginary world of, I think, the world of mathematics. I think, and this was my romantic relationship. You see that you can't sleep, you don't understand. It's so mystical, it's a mysterious thing of the mathematics started coming before me. And at the same time, when I used to go to library, I found some of the greatest books in mathematics were not touched by the readers. I think there were 70,000 books in my IIT Delhi library in the 6th. I think when I was studying, I think I decided then to touch every book, not read, but touch every book, see the preface, and get exposed to that kind of mathematics. This brought me to so many different dimensions of mathematics. I think the algebraic equations, I'm talking of the algebraic equations, the differential equations, integral equations, integral differential equations, the functional equations, their solutions, the abstract spaces. And that's why Professor Kulkarni, I would say, it was that romantic relationship, because unless you are mad, you cannot understand, I think, the deepest truths behind the equations that have. So I think we now express that the equations that change the world. I think it is not anything else. These are the equations that change the world. That we may call it physics, and we may call it mathematics, and the elegant solutions that came out and can be expressed the reality in a totally different way. And this also, the tradition came from the Vedic traditions, the sutras, the sutra granthas, and sutras. That sutras means equation. I think the greatest truths are expressed in few ways. There is in mathematical form or the linguistic form. There is another great contribution which has been there, which I was attracted to, was the language and mathematics. I think this is one thing which we must appreciate, that the two great contributions, one coming from Panini Ashtadhyayi. I think the grammar that he wrote, the language of language. I think the language of languages. I think the Ashtadhyayi form, first abstraction in 18 chapters of Ashtadhyayi, and that can model the entire human language. The greatest accomplishment I see. And second thing was the Pingala. So when I entered computers, I started studying computers in a way, and I was not interested in just John, what is the magic behind these computers? The magic behind computers is its expression in the binary numbers. Anything humans can perceive. But Turing had observed that. Alan Turing had observed that whatever humans can perceive, imagine, and that can be expressed in this form, in the computer language, like the binary forms, 0 and 1, as we call it. It can be anything, 0 and non-zero, in that form. That fascinated me. How that every human thought, every human perception, every color, every word, I think a symbol, every language alphabet can be expressed in this form, and then it can be processed, like in the mind processes the information. That fascinated me, and I think Alan Turing's observation that if it can be expressed, it can be modeled on computers, and that's how I think it attracted me. And later, the coming of transistor in 1947, around when India gets independence, that was another thing. That and transistor was that magic switch, the semiconductor switch, which was before us. And with that thing, we can create machines for such a processing, and the digital processing was born, I think. And then the manifestation of microprocessor, which came by the team from Intel, the Intel's team, and putting the entire computer on a chip, and then they like creating a mind outside your body, almost like that. And whatever humans can do, the machines could do in a certain sense. And that attracted me very much. So mathematics, language, and its manifestation in this form of these technologies, and that changed the world. If you really look at the coming of transistors, I think it's a great event. I think IEEE acknowledges, and all of us acknowledge coming of transistor, coming of microprocessor, and then internet, and the new language which came, and the digitization of the whole world, a digital form that that changed, I think, the course of human history, and that attracted me, and more in the abstract form. And I think that has been my obsession later on. I think I try to understand. Then the question came in the 1990s. Our economy was liberated, and we had the challenges of building India's modern industries, which came, and electronics came at that time. I think the great opportunity that came to India was that opportunity at that time to really study computers first time. At that time, I think 1988, when your society was formed, SIA society, I think this was formed around the same time. I came to Pune. I came to Pune at that time, and I was given the challenge of, as Professor Ravindra Kukni explained, of developing India's first supercomputer, as a called, which can perform 1 billion mathematical operations per second at that time, which even today's I think the standard your I think laptops, not any computer can perform, or any one. So that was the challenge, to develop that supercomputer, and that introduced to a very different world, building computing devices, computing machines. I was again looking at not just as a technology, but the entire paradigm shift which we'll have for the humanity, that when these devices come before us. And that's what exactly happened. In the 90s, we had the challenge of, I think, developing software for the world, because of what is now known as the Y2K challenge. And suddenly, the challenge for the entire humanity is how do we convert entire software, I think, and for Y2K compliances. That became the opportunity which we had never anticipated. Suddenly, we started studying computers, and I think the responsibility fell on me as a CDAC director, or thing, to train people in computer languages. I think particularly using C, C++, introducing computer architecture, and that became the challenge. And the opportunity was so big that the challenge was, can anybody become, how do we create these software engineers in not in thousands, not in 10,000, but millions. And we didn't have computer science guys of that number, even in IIT. All these to put together, when suddenly I got an idea that who told that only the computer guys or electronics guys can be software engineers. And then we questioned that, and we started training any engineer, civil, mechanical, metallurgy, even commerce graduates, as a software engineers. And we created a course, what you call like Japanese called it software factories. We created that kind of thing in CDAC. I think, and that school produced, I think when I was asked by Sam Pitroda at that time, who had come from the US for telecom development, along with Rajiv Gandhi, he said, we don't require 1,000, we require 10,000. We require 10,000 engineers in a very short time. And then this idea came, we developed this training course, and this became the world's largest, I think, training program for creating software engineers eventually. And that's how by 1998, I think when the new Prime Minister at that time, Atal Bihari Vajpayee said that, can we make this magic happen? This happened through this training program. And suddenly the large number of engineers started becoming software engineers. And any software engineers will take the next flight and come to the US. And, and that's how so many people migrated to the US. And so many software companies started emerging in the US. And later on, they decided to have the outfits in India, in Bangalore, and in many places. I think they have software technology parks. And suddenly a whole picture changed. The cities changed, everything, just because of one, I think, this magic of creating, not that the world, other parts of the world, they were not doing this, but we were doing in the numbers which were unimaginable at that time. And to anybody, metallurgy, civil, mechanical, or anything like that, even commerce graduates, they become software engineers. Software engineers in the sense of just you have to study a language. I think like that thing. And this was a magic which was the software industry. I think India started emerging, what is called now IT industry, information technology. Information technology is a strange combination. It's a great combination of what you talk about, that literacy and numeracy. I think we are studying one side, we are studying the mathematics. I think this one. Another side, we are studying the language. So when we started CDAC, the computing program, I was very attracted by these things. That computing machinery should be able to handle not only the numbers, but should handle, of course, the language. And then the obsession was just not the word processing, but the language processing. And one of the things which I wanted to do was the natural language processing. That was the first thing with artificial intelligence, as we call it, natural language processing. That came from a different perspective also, that India has so many languages at that time. So now there are 22 official languages and 1,700 different languages, I think, in one country. And how do you address such a diverse things like that thing, and from different things? So I decided in CDAC, one of the thing, we will develop supercomputers, we do develop the high performance computers, and eventually develop the AI computers. But one of the applications would be language processing, natural language processing. Now, if I go back, this tradition goes back to the Paninian framework. This tradition goes back to the Vedic framework it goes back to Sankhya tradition. It goes back to the Pingala tradition, which we had that now, bringing these two disciplines together. And the binary contribution came from Pingala. First, it came from Bull in England later on, but from the Vedic time, it came from Pingala. I think the Laghu and Guru representations in the linguistic way, and we have to go deep into this issue, that what is the meaning. And there is a wonderful video available on this subject, that the greatest contribution is this. One is the numbers, and another is these alphabets and language, and of course the great Sanskrit language, and who contributed to that. I think this has been the great tradition which we have got, I think, which we need to bring before our IT engineers and software engineers. And second thing is that at that time, I got interested in artificial intelligence for different reasons, because the knowledge-based computer system has started. The grand project was started in Japan in the 80s. And we decided that we will, because of our multilingual country, we'll take this like a national technological mission. And we started studying natural language processing. This introduced to me Sanskrit language. How NLP can be done using Paninian grammar, and how machine translation can be done using Paninian grammar, and what would be the contribution of the Indian mathematicians in this tradition. And that's how I came to the ancient India contribution to mathematics, I think, and how we gave so fundamental breakthroughs were made, and then they were shared across the world. I think this is how I started doing this. And there were, at one time, in institutions like, there were so many Sanskrit Pandits. sitting in my laboratory on one side, and there are also so many computer scientists working together on this perspective, and they are still working. And we are looking at this, how do we address the problem of multilingual technologies, multilingual information processing by using both the ancient knowledge and modern perspectives like this. At one time, while developing the supercomputers, I was fascinated by the large numbers which were obsessed with, and at that time, I think we were talking about very large numbers. Today, I think we're talking in supercomputing terms, we talk about exascale supercomputing, performing 10 to the power 18 mathematical operations per second. And that is the goal of supercomputers, that current supercomputers must be exascale, exaflop supercomputers, performing 10 to the power 18 mathematical operations in double precision, whatever kind of accuracy we want on these computers. The question came to my mind was, where do such large numbers arise? How we were obsessed when people did not know how to write these numbers. The Romans did not know how to write those numbers in the large numbers. And we didn't have even terms for the million, billion, trillion, and then come peta, and then beyond peta, how do you write that? How do you call them? So specific terms have to decide, things like that, things. And then beyond peta came exa, and now beyond that, the computing power is increasing by a factor of 1,000 every 10 years. And then we're developing this kind of thing. Where are these large numbers required? And they are required, I think, they are required everywhere. I think there's a great Indian Rishis who think that they imagine this kind of thing, that how many number of atoms, if you say atoms in the universe would be, there will be 10 to the power 80, say atoms would be there in the world. How do you represent them? How do you operate on them? Kind of things. How many neurons are in your brain? We have again come to the numbers like 100 billion and number of cells which you have to play with, and every manifestation, number of stars in the sky. So we imagine those large numbers, and we'll have to work with them, and we will have to name them. I think most languages did not have naming of such large numbers, which we attempted to do, how our rishis attempted to do. And thanks to the decimal system, we could play with such large numbers. Otherwise, it wouldn't have been possible. And then came the binary systems, and I think we are talking about that anything can be represented, not only just numbers, but languages or the colors or whatever the human sensory apparatus we have. Everything what humans can pursue can be expressed in this kind of in that binary numbers or numbers like this kind of things. And that's what we are. I think the breakthrough is not just technology, but is a conceptual breakthrough. As like rightly, I think what Einstein called imagination is more important than even invention. And then that imagination really attracted me, that we require today to imagine things which were never done before, which are earlier. And that's what Einstein did. And then the space and time converge together in a way, I think, and then there are roots on these things, that how did you imagine this world? What kind of world? How can the universities? So all that will take me from the most modern sciences to the most ancient sciences. And then how do they my whole life attempt has been to bring this together to the disciplines like science and spirituality. Before spirituality, I'm talking of humanities. Today, artificial intelligence must be applied to humanities more than that. And humanities people are not aware of that. The linguistic people are not aware of these modern disciplines. So there is a need for bringing up not only people from science, also from humanities and arts together, I think, and trying to understand the reality. This has been possible now. Of course, the US universities have been very liberal in this thing. You can pursue this. And there are many researchers, there are many great thinkers, like in linguistics, like now Noam Chokshi, and there are many others, I think, who have pursued that discipline, but that needs to happen. So Indian academicians, I would say a few moments I will spend on Indian academic people in America. I think America has been a very open nation. I think I must thank them, and we are grateful to America, Canada, and particularly country that they welcome, I think, the Indian intellectuals like you, people there, and who could flower, who got nurtured there, and they're set free for their imagination. And then so much contribution came from Indians to world of science, or humanity in that sense, I would say world of science and technology and arts and mathematics and everything would not have been possible because of this open policy. I think it's I go back to the days of Takshashila and Nalanda, where people used to come. India, the world's first university at that time, I think we have talked of 700 BC. I think at that time, in Takshashila University got one of the most liberal universities of the world for several thousands of years. I think it existed until it existed. Now it is in the ruins. But Takshashila's great contribution, the great people, I think, the Chanakya, and we are talking about the Jivakais of Ayurveda, contributions to Ayurveda, and we have so many contributions to mathematics, astronomy, and other things. But these universities contributed to that. So I think bringing all the people and attracting people of the world together in some of the great universities of where the universalization of mind can occur is the greatest contribution of the the US thing, or in Canada, some like that countries, and those countries really developed. I think today the countries have developed because of this liberal framework, and which India now should create and trying to create. I am very proud to report to you, not tell you that today when I started studying, there were no schools. I think there were girls had to swim across to reach the schools. There were no chalks, there were no teachers. Today, I think India has been able to create, so also the other countries also, but I think create one of the largest educational infrastructure in our country. The country is very big, 138 crore people. I think we very soon will cross China, but now we didn't have school infrastructure. We didn't have college infrastructure. We didn't have great things, but thanks, I think some of the people started thinking about it. The university, one of the first universities modern universities came in 1857, and today I'm seeing that currently and slowly, and we have about 1,000 universities in now. I never thought that we so quickly will have 1,000 universities. The universities of different standards. There are very good universities, and there are like colleges. Others are nothing but more than colleges like that. But I'm telling you, there are 1,000 universities in India, and of course there are institutes like IITs, Institutes of Science, and IITs, and research institutes like TIFR, and many of the CSIR laboratories, or so many defense laboratories. So the infrastructure got slowly developed today, and we are now talking about institutes of eminence. I think 20 institutes of eminence of world-class nature. I think what good universities of today, I think, which we are trying to develop, and I have no doubt that we'll over a period of time we'll develop these universities, and they are attracting now. I think we got attracted to the US universities. Now these new universities are trying to attract, I think, the people like you to spend some time. And we need not think the same term that I think we have to create a framework by which I think there is a free exchange of people can come. You can study here. You can, of course, you can study in this university as well as the Indian university. I think you can have affiliation in both the universities. We can create a framework. So of course, there is some citizenship issue, dual citizenship issues, and of course the research, and particularly the startups. What I'm seeing in the IT issue is that the largest number of startups are coming from Indians, also in the US. So can we create startups involving Indian universities and also the Indian research laboratories, and also of course the US universities, and then the greatest of innovations which are thrived there. But doing it together is I think the time has come to working together across the world, particularly the American universities, that means the US and Canada universities of this one, and also the Indian university frameworks and the startups thing. This is the opportunity, and this is the opportunity we are looking at. We have created like SIA, AA, we have created what is called the GIST, the Global Indian Science and Technology thing. GIST, people coming together. Can we interact? Can we make the society based on that kind of thing? So I will seek a collaboration with SIA on that, and linking from both the sides, and taking the challenges of the humanities. I feel that the challenge of the humanities cannot be solved by one nation. For example, the problem of climate change cannot be solved by one nation. The climate problem of the corona, I think this cannot be solved by one nation. It must be solved as a whole world together, and then only you can. Most of the problems are emerging like that. I think and that's why we must come together, and that's why I think the great saints called that Vishwaji Majegar. This whole world is one my family. I cannot separate America or US or this or Canada or China or this kind of things. No more. I think we have to solve. We have to understand the nature of reality. We have to understand our common future together and solve these problems by working together. I think this is the call today, and I will appeal to SIA that let us make some good beginning. Of course, there are many attempts that are being made, but let us make some systematic worldwide attempt, and particularly from US and Canada, who are much liberal in this framework by which all of you are there, and we can inspire and we can welcome to India. India has to do many things, of course, for this and the policy changes and other frameworks, but they will come together when we start working on the grand challenge problems like climate change, like virus, where the challenge is whether we'll exist or not if we don't work together. So these challenges which already we solved, and through this, I would say that I offer you the educational infrastructure in the sense that of 1,000 universities, 45,000 colleges, 1.5 million schools, and 350 million students who are studying in India. And of course, most of them are aspiring to go to these countries, US and Canada, to learn better and come back. Earlier, we used to talk about brain drain. And then some people said brain in the drain. The brain drain is better than brain in the drain. But it is now the other side. This has come. That is that we are talking. A lot of people are returning back, sharing their knowledge, participating in conferences and conventions of this kind of thing, like the same webinars. And Corona has given the opportunity for us where we started intensely interacting across the world. And this is an opportunity which would have not come without Corona in this form. And thanks to, I think, by inviting me for this, I would have talked much about mathematics and mathematics contribution to engineering and many other things and things. But I think mathematics has been the fascination from the Vedic times, and how the number system came, how the languages came, how they intermingled, how they created, and we started understanding the reality in better and better, in the more things form. And we are here to share this knowledge, understand this knowledge, and share this knowledge with the new generation. So thank you for inviting me and giving me an opportunity to share my random thoughts with you. That's why I didn't want to bring some presentations, didn't want to get limited to that format, and just wanted to really appeal that we have now the new challenges before this global world. We say global world, but we have a global problem which cannot be solved by one group or one university or one thing like that. We must work together and learn to work together in a virtual mode. Finally, I would say that this is what Shankaracharya, Jagat Guru, the world teacher, Shankaracharya had imagined. We'll be living in three worlds simultaneously. I will say in Sanskrit, one is the Prapanchik Satta, the Prapanchik field, with the practical field, which we the common sense practical field is one. Second thing is that in the world of Pratibhasik, what you call virtual, he talked at that time, we will be like in dreams we live, or imaginations we live, and that is as real as the physical world. And the third is the Paramarthik, that is the ultimate reality, and we'll be living simultaneously in these three worlds, and that's what we are experiencing. There we are sitting at different places, we are communicating with each other. So this is a world which is, it cannot be defined as a real or imaginary. It's called virtually, which is cannot be indescribable. What is called this? It is not cannot be described by words, but this world is. But we are living together what he had imagined, and we are advancing. I think, and giving meaning to the highest purpose of life is giving meaning to life. I think we are trying to give meaning to our life, and what is education is giving meaning to life and fulfilling that things, and which is the greatest joy. Thank you very much for inviting me, for speaking to you or learning from you. So with these things, I will end my articulations. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Padmashree Bhatkar. It's a wonderful journey what you took back for last, at least 5 decades, 5 decades, really wonderful experience. So you took us back to our school days and college days when I was in studying my master's program. in IIT Banaras, actually. So it's IIT, it was IT, but now it became the IIT BHU, as I say. During that time, the computer actually room was so big, it's like a big bungalow. So that bungalow has the power. Now, if you see, even the phone has a number of bungalows power, actually. Even if you say any smartphone is much
Yes.
large capacity and a large brain to really run the programs. So thank you very much for sharing your experience and involvement in how you transformed from electrical to mathematics to computers, computer science and all. With a little, a couple of parallel things, what I did also, because basically I'm a mining engineer, and then I did master's in planning and designing in IIT. And then after that, I went to France and I did my advanced engineering in France, but came to US and become converted into computer science. So that's my background now in the US. I'm a professor and a registrar at FIT, Fashion Institute of Technology in New York. So in this case, as you mentioned, that collaborative work. So we developed a program between India and FIT, that is Fashion Institute of Technology in State University of New York, a collaborative degree program that's called a dual degree program. So the students come from India and they study here 1 year, and they go back and they complete their degree in India. And so they earn the dual degrees from one from India and one from US. So this way, the students coming from India is really enriching so much knowledge in the US, the technology in fashion side. The fashion means, it doesn't mean only just models. Everybody thinks about models, but like any engineering, we have at least 32 branches of fashion design programs, even the photography, fashion photography, and art side, and design side, jewelry design. So you name it, I mean, there's so many branches in that. So the point I wanted to mention is IBM with artificial intelligence, IBM and the Fashion Institute of Technology, FIT, combinedly doing a lot of research now in see that how artificial intelligence can be used in the fashion design side. So even they don't need to measure the measurements of any person. So it can really scan it, and then they can prepare the dresses. So there's a lot going on in a combination between Indian faculty, Indian students, and US students also. Thank you very much, sir, once again, giving this really inside of a computer science era from more than 5 decades. Thank you once again.
Question.
And no, 1 second. Before I send it to, I request Kishorji to monitor the questions and continue from here now.
Very good. Well, we will be happy to have questions from the audience. If you unmute yourself and keep your questions short. But
okay, 1 second, Kishorji.
Type your questions and send them in the chat. I will be happy to read it to him as well. But let's start with Dr. Ishwar Padia as the first question. Yes, sir.
Yes, I got a two-part question. Number one is, in 90s, SIA initiated program to kind of have a visitor lectureship or program with Indian universities. Unfortunately, we did not get much response. So maybe we should try again that, because we do have a lot of talented professors here who are active, who would like to contribute to the Indian development as well. So they would be very happy to have this kind of exchange program or short-term visiting program or something like that, you know. My second question is, you mentioned very nicely that there are thousands of universities and so on. My question is, what is the level of research going on? Because just getting a degree for seeking a job or something like that, that is not very productive in that sense. Is any research going on? What is the level? Unfortunately, I'm a little bit out of touch with Indian research. So if you enlighten that, that would be great. Thank you.
Can I take this question?
Yes, sure.
Mr. Kishore?
Yes.
And I'll keep it very short. And of course, there are, I said 1,000 universities of different caliber, different depth. I think some are just purely teaching universities, degree awarding universities, and some of them are, of course, doing deep research and advanced research. So we look at the, I think our IITs and ISERs and Institute of Science and such higher educational institutions, I think including, they are doing research, in comparable research, and they are with international publications. And I think most of them studied in the US or Canada or Australia sometimes, and they have come back. So that is a comparable kind of universities where collaborations can be established. And there are many institutions now, even including private sectors of this kind. But out of 1,000, there may be typically of 100 universities of this kind. And many of them will be just degree awarding universities, but you have to establish, and they'll be very pleased to get, I think, any kind of collaboration propositions or what they are interested in, and the interest match. And there is a scheme in the Ministry of Science and Technology for this, as we said, the short-term visits, and also with the, I think, fellowships to support your stay and do the joint research work at the Kanadi. So those schemes are also there some way, and we need to do a lot. But these are available. The good research also is going on in terms of publications. You can see. So,
Thank you.
Professor Rohit Parikh has a question. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you. Am I unmuted?
Yes, you are.
Yes.
Yes, you're audible, sir.
Right. So I was very pleased to find that Professor Bhatkar is chancellor of one of the oldest universities in the world, possibly the oldest university. And I believe you are a successor to Amartya Sen. Am I right?
Amartya Sen, yes.
Yes. So ancient India really made enormous contributions because Panini anticipated some of Chomsky's ideas more than 2,000 years before him. And
Yes.
Shankaracharya, even though we call him Jagat Guru, the rest of the Jagat outside India does not know how great a philosopher he was, right?
Yes.
So ancient India has made enormous contributions. These contributions have been less, right? I mean, one could say that there's been a certain decline in Indian philosophy, even as there has been enormous improvement in Indian technology and Indian commerce. Some of the richest people in the world are Indian, and India is the largest vaccine manufacturer. But we have fallen behind in philosophy, which used to be the country in which we were one of the two greats. I would say Greece and India were the two greatest countries in philosophy at one time, right? So I would say now there is a tension between ancient India and the modernizers, with the people who are more Western, right? And I think that these people perhaps do not appreciate the contributions of ancient India, but these need to be reconciled. So I would say that the westernized Indians, people like Amartya Sen, and people who love ancient India need to somehow come together and build a common frame. And that common frame, in my view, must also include a relationship with Islam, because many of our neighbors are Islamic countries, and we have excellent relations with Bangladesh and Iran. And moreover, in 10 years, India will be the largest Muslim country in the world. So I would say that these three chains of thought, ancient India, and India as the source of wisdom, the westernized Indians, people like Sen and many others, and Islam, that these three need to come together to build a vision for India. And I would say that perhaps that kind of vision can come best from people like Tagore and Gandhi, and before them from Kabir. So India needs a kind of identity, a universal vision, which I think India is quite capable of, because India has always been tolerant. Come one, come all has always been the Indian attitude.
I think, Professor Parikh, you have raised a very important issue in terms of the direction for our education and research. We do not know ourselves, we don't know in universities what great contributions have been made by Indians. We also don't know. I think, and of course, we know at a very superficial level, but what fundamental breakthroughs happened, and that need to be studied. As you said, the Paninian contributions or the contributions of Pingala, and also later on that relationship with the Muslim scholars. I think there has been great contributions there also. So we need to take a very liberal view in that framework, as well as opposed to say that we have a very large Muslim population.
Yes. And there is a great deal of similarity between Rumi and Dhaneshwar.
Right. Yes.
Between Rumi and Dhaneshwar are like brothers. If you read one and the other, then you see how similar they are.
Yes, yes. So I appreciate that, and we need to really orient ourselves for this much larger view, much broader view, and which India can, I think we can take by very at fundamental level. We can see that kind of thing, and we see that when you try to identify with the entire reality, Brahma, Aham Brahmasmi, like that, and we say that kind of thing. So we need to really practice that, and only I think we can practice, and we should bring the new order for that. And that's what that orientation is, not universities for universalization of mind. What
Yes.
they made to be, that orientation has to be there. I agree with you.
Very good. Well, thank you very much. Next question is from Vivek Shankar Natarajan from Houston.
Shri Vijay Bhatkar Mahodaya, Namaskaraha. This is such a great day, and wishing everybody in the room, first of all, a happy Gudi Padwa. And this is the time of the Indian New Year, and we are starting with your ideas. Such a wonderful idea, you've been giving. Sir, in fact, it's a fanboy moment because we all grew when I was a student. You are a hero to us because of your work in supercomputers. So first of all, it's such a dream come true to talk to you, sir. My thing is, when we talk about India and Indian tradition, and I agree with Professor Parikh, we need to dip deep, and you are at that vantage position because you had the Nalanda University. But having said that, at the same time, when we talk about India, and I'm myself a follower of Shankaracharya, and I do read the Bhashyas, but at the same time, we have to be also cautious that we don't go into the jingoism angle. But that is one thing. The other thing is, and I have a specific question, and I think Professor Vinod also echoed is echoing the same thing. We hear that Sanskrit is one of the best languages of our computer programming. Is that rhetoric? And some people even quote NASA. Is there some empirical research, or is it just conjecture?
I think there are some real stories, and there are some mythical stories about. I think we need to. I think there is a wonderful video recently somebody has put on the YouTube on this issue, addressing precisely this kind of thing, and what is the connection with NASA. The Rick Briggs had worked in NASA sometime, but it has no connection with NASA in that sense at all. Rick Briggs came to Banaras and wrote and studied Sanskrit grammar, something, and he found very similar things with the computational languages, and that's how the relationship came because of his individual paper, which came. But I think there is a very strong connection between and we need to, and I tried to explore this in CDAC, where people started studying Sanskrit language along with natural language processing. IBM is doing a lot of research in this direction. There are other people who have taken the Paninian approach for machine translation, MT. That project is still going on in the recent CDAC on machine translation of across languages. So there is a strong connection, but I think the deepest level, it has not been explored. It has to be done at the deepest level, understanding the Paninian grammar to that depth, really, which requires to understand the model of the language itself. I think many people have explored with much needs to be done on that direction. And some of these stories are that is the best language. It is indeed the best language in that sense, but finally, one of the goals in computing languages has been that can human language be the language of computers itself. I think we're removing all ambiguities and removing all that kind of thing. So natural languages processing can be done like that. One day it will, how it will be possible, So there are steady progresses. We are talking about devices like Siri and other things like that. You speak to that language and understanding and understanding speech processing, image processing. So those things are slowly emerging now. I think one day, I think we will come started there. And there the ancient call it the contributions of Panini and Pingle to be very, very useful. So,
we have one of great Hindu scholars in our audience, Rishikesh Vinod, besides doing economics, also does some Hindu economics, and he has something to say on the Sanskrit too. Here is Professor Vinod. Yes, sir.
Hi, thanks for that.
Well, I'm not that good looking.
No, I just wanted to say a happy Gudi Padwa, and also ask this more precisely or more. So there is this computer language and there is Sanskrit, but how is the connection. Can you be a little more specific on how one can, knowing the
No, I think-
Sanskrit, how does it benefit computing?
No, so this is what has been the, I think, any computer language of a machine which has to be precise, logical, unambiguous, that comes from. But as we develop higher and higher level of languages, particularly with the emergence of artificial intelligence, understanding the human languages better and better. So it is possible directly to go to the machine from the human interactions possible. And that's what I think the simple devices like, I think when you speak to the home devices like Siri, that you ask a question, they understand the language and they give you the answer in human language. So these are the emergence which have become very popular. You can now, this is spreading everywhere in the cars, in driverless cars. You talk to the car and then it understands your language.
No, what I want to know is there a connection with Sanskrit? Do they first translate to Sanskrit and then
No,
to computers?
there is one approach which IBM also is taking, and then many other people are taken, that to make they go to convert this into Sanskrit in through the Paninian grammar understanding, and then go back to English. So these are one of the approaches, efficient approaches to be made. So,
that's very interesting. Yeah.
Yes.
Very good. One of my friends and a member in the audience is Arun Annachatre. He is in Belgium. No, where are you, Arun, these days? Yeah, he moves around, but he's somewhere in Europe, and he has a question. So Arun, please go ahead. Are you there, Arun? Okay, well, let's go to the next one then. A friend in Houston, Mangesh.
Arun is
No,
there.
one second. Please unmute, Arunji. Please unmute because you're muted.
Oh.
1 second, hold on. Yeah, please unmute.
Yeah.
If not,
Can
we
you
can
hear
come.
me?
Yes. Now we can hear you. Go ahead.
Namaskar, Bhatkar sir. Me, Arun Annachatre. I'm speaking Marathi also. So my question is, it's in your views, what is the level of artificial intelligence in India versus developed countries? And what are your expectations in next decade for India?
I think this question has been very adequately answered, and recently it has been a subject of animated discussions. Where I think if you look at Rajiv Malhotra's new book, Artificial Intelligence and Power, there's a very big book which has come, and my interview also is there with him on this issue, that what is the status, and he concludes that though we are making a lot of things on talking about artificial intelligence, artificial intelligence has not penetrated other than computing a scientific field, particularly in humanities and say in very important applications like judiciary. So I'm currently a member of how artificial intelligence can be applied in judiciary, and how it can help when we have lakhs and lakhs, of course, like thousands of pending cases. Can we understand? Can we translate many of the things? Judgments are in the regional languages in different states. How this translation can be done, and we are indeed doing this. We are developing various tools of artificial intelligence for disposing of cases which are well understood cases, like a settlement of the check bouncing cases or the accident cases, which are very well understood cases, and also help us in dishing out or judgments to this process is happening. And there are many, of course, there are many applications which people are not aware of it. So one side, I think that there is an attempt being made. Second is there is a lot to be done. But I will bring your kind attention, which you must be already knowing, Rajiv Malhotra's book on AI and what do you call the politics or the power, which he talks about it.
A few weeks ago, we had Rajiv Malhotra on this webinar series. So he spoke to our audience for almost 1 hour about his book and also about his, which were
yes.
Yeah, I was not there, Kishore, but thank you very much for this answer. I will definitely go through this book from Rajiv Malhotra. I will try to read it and understand.
Very readable book. Very readable book.
We'll take a last question for the benefit of closing it on time. and that comes from Houston with my friend Mangesh Rizbud of Houston. So Mangesh, are you there? Here we go.
Yes, hello. Thank you for having me here. And it was really a great honor and privilege to be with you all. I was not prepared to start my video on, but that's okay. My question is that we keep hearing the term molecular computing, and if you could speak a little bit about that and really its applications and state of research for us.
Yeah, molecular computing is one direction which we are seeing that thing at biomolecular computing, but the way it is the field is moving forward in terms of technologies is at the silicon level itself still. I think what we are trying to do with the companies like Intel and also NVIDIA, I think more, and it's still based on silicon technology right now. And the next big thing is going to be quantum computing. I think we already have some quantum computers, demonstrators, simulators, which many people are working, and then actual machines also. And the goal is now to move to the next jump is going to be quantum computing. Before that, we are trying to develop machines which can perform what I said, exascale supercomputing, which can perform several graphics operations, which is NVIDIA is driving, and also this one. And soon we will have, I think, the large IT infrastructures at that level, which will be accessed by called clouds. The clouds will be accessed by anybody. They can be accessed from their smartphones, and many of the things can be done using this connectivity through the large clouds, which will be nothing but supercomputers of tomorrow. The next jump will be going to be quantum computing.
Very good. Well, thank you very much, Dr. Bhatkar. On my personal behalf, I'm very appreciative that you came, and I know it's about 10:30 p.m. in Pune, so
9:30 right now.
We kept you awake for a little longer, but thank you very much for accommodating our time and this wonderful introduction to the computer. I would like to pass it on to Dr. Ravindra Kulkarni, and then he will have a closing statement, unless Raj has something to say.
No, thank you, Kishorji, and please, Ravindraji, go ahead. Thank you very much once again, Vijayji, for your time, and of course, thank you very much for your wonderful webinar. Ravindraji, go ahead.
Ravi, you're muted.
Ravinji, please unmute.
Unmute. Yeah.
Ravinji, please unmute. You need to unmute. No, not yet. Please unmute. Yes, now you can speak now.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Vijayji, for gracing this occasion, coming to SIA. We expect to have a long relationship with you. I could make some more comments on what was mentioned before, but you did not mention your one favorite topic of Gulab Rao Maharaj. He's a modern scientist. He's a modern scientist.
Oh, I see.
Of the 19th, 20th century.
Yes.
Wrote in Sanskrit, and that's why the people do not know about what he wrote. And so, well, anyway, so we have to learn from each other, and it's a slow process, but certainly it's like a spiral going up rather than just a circle. And so, well, thank you for this wonderful talk, and we shall keep in touch with you. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, sir,
Thank
everybody.
you very much.
And
Enjoyed it.
And on behalf of SIA, I sincerely thank Padma Shri Vijay Bhatkarji for his time and the valuable knowledge sharing with all of us. And once again, I thank all the audience and all the SIA members for participating in this webinar. Thank you once again. And that concludes the today's webinar. Kishorji, anything else?
No, I think we do have executive committee meeting right after this. So if you are an executive committee member, stay along. Otherwise, thank you again from joining us from all over the world. And we look forward to seeing you again in the next webinar, which we will have very soon. And maybe Dr. Bhatkar, if he's willing, we will have you come back again, talk about new scientists in India too. Very good. Thank you very much.
Yes.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, sir. Thank you very much. So I will conclude the session, and then please log in all the executive members, if that is okay. Thank you, sir. Thank you. Have a wonderful weekend.